was sitting by the fireside, taking a walk through the snow, listening to a children's choir, singing songs about Jesus, the blessed way that he came to us. That spirit of Christmas, that spirit of Christmas, oh Christmas, oh Christmas.
I'm not crying. It is a good song, though. That's the song. That's from Christmas Vacation. I don't know if you remember that part. He has the Schwami thing on his head, and he's like sitting up in the attic, and he's watching the little film thing. And then if anybody who loves people or has a heart in their chest, at that spot, you're like, oh, my kids are getting so old. They're like, they're 6 weeks old. I know, how have these 6 weeks gone by? So they're getting so big. Anyway, John 14. That's what we're going to talk about today. If you don't have a Bible and you'd like to use one, just raise your hand. Someone will bring you one. You can either keep that or you can borrow it. It's our gift to you either way. You can also take your smart device, open up the YouVersion app or the Bible app, and if your location services are enabled, we'll automatically pop up. Otherwise, click on the More button in the bottom right-hand corner. A little search box will come up. Put Life Church Green Bay in there. Everything you're going to see on the screens behind me, other than a little video that I have today, they will show up. If you're watching us live on our online campus, or you're at one of our services at the Brown County Correctional Facility, which, by the way, today Pastor Dallas and I are going, and we are going to do baptisms at the Brown County Correctional Facility. And so love you. So glad you're here. Yeah, give them a hand today. And so obviously we kicked it off last week, but kicking off this Christmas season kind of with this idea that Jesus came to bring us hope. And since every one of us in this place could use a little bit of extra hope, we're doing this series, we're calling it Christmas in the 920, where we're talking about anticipation and expectation by talking about perception and perspective. And so last week I talked about Naomi's perspective. She thought she was going to get one thing, but instead she got another. Her gift wasn't wrapped the way that she anticipated. It looked a little bit different than she expected. And, you know, I used to think I was good at wrapping presents. Like particularly when I got married, I thought I was the jam. I thought I'll wrap my own presents. I'm so good at wrapping presents. And I'd lay out all the gear, all the essentials. I'd have the wrapping paper, the tape, the knife, the bows, the name tags, and I'd do my best wrap job. But somehow my presents never looked the way on the gift that they looked in my mind. And then 2 years ago, I was walking through the mall, and there was this little booth where these really happy, cheery, Christmassy people were wrapping other people's presents. And they had all the tools already there. And for the small fee of $1 for a small package or $2 for a large package, they'd wrap your presents for you. And so you come and you drop the gifts at the kiosk and you leave like you go to the food court or something, and then they'll tell you like, hey, come back in such and such amount of time and your presents, they'll be wrapped, they'll be ready. And so I dropped my gifts off at the present daycare, and I went to like the mall food court and I got like some pizza or something, and I came back at the time that they told me to come back. And when I got back, my presents, they were wrapped. And I mean, they were tight, y'all. I mean, they wrapped those gifts like a Marine makes a bed. I mean, corners folded and tucked, everything crisp. It was like they took an iron and there wasn't a single wrinkle anywhere in my present. I mean, they even put like that little ribbon around it that nobody else on earth knows how to do. You know, where they do the thing with the scissors. It has the little like curly cube pigtail things at the end of it. And I got those presents, man. They were going to make me look like a pro. There was only one problem. When I came to pick my presents back up, none of them were labeled. So I didn't know whose gift was whose. So I had to take those presents home, and I had to unwrap all those. It was like I had 2 Christmas sets. I was like, oh, yay, a sweater and a girl's small. This is perfect. This is exactly. So I had 2 Christmases without knowing it, and I had to take those beautifully wrapped gifts and tear all the packages off, and I had to rewrap them. And then once again, I had to go through the fact that the presents didn't look like I thought they'd look or like I wanted them to look. They certainly didn't look like they did when I picked them back up from those trained professionals. But what did happen is at least the right people got the right gifts. See, today I want to talk about a group of guys who thought that they were going to get one thing, but instead they got another. A group of guys whose gift was wrapped differently than they anticipated, that looked totally opposite of what they expected. So today I want to talk to you about the disciples' perspective. So God, we love you and we honor you. We're grateful to you for everything that this season represents. Like, it's so overwhelming sometimes. Like, I mean, we always know you're there. We always think about you, most of us anyway. We kind of always give you attention and focus, but it's like so concentrated in this season. It's so cool how when we're conscious of what this season represents, everywhere we look, you're there. So today, God, I pray that that would carry over from this season. And that as we kind of transition into Christmas and then out of Christmas, I pray that something that we think about during this time of the year, that it would stick. That God, we'd have less of our own agenda and pick up more of yours. In Jesus' name, amen. God, I wonder if have you ever wanted one thing but you get another, like last week when I said that you asked for boots but you got Nutrisystem, or you asked for the new iPhone but instead you got nose hair trimmers, which every man at the age of 40 beyond knows he needs but doesn't want to admit. He doesn't want to trim his eyebrows even though they look like the Count of Monte Cristo. You know, it's are you Count Dracula? Like, what's happening where there's more hair on his ears or in his ears than are in his head? Like, you can't, here's the deal. Here's the problem, men. Like, we can't see our own ears. But when you start thinking that you need to turn the TV up, get the trimmers. Just put them in, get the still weed whacker and put it inside your ear. Like, does it ever feel like you make a list and you check it twice, but nobody else even checks it once? Like, they get you a bunch of other gifts, but they don't get you the gift that you actually wanted or the gift that you actually asked for. You ever feel like people are going for quantity over quality? Like, maybe you're like me, and as you're like unwrapping those gifts silently, you're doing the math, and you think, you spent more than you would have if you just would have bought me what it was I asked for or what it was I wanted. Here's another one. You ever have people who they get you stuff that they would have wanted? Like, I'm famous for that one. Like, if you know me at all, there's like two things about me that ring true year round. Is number one, I'm a big time gift giver because I'm a gift receiver. If you look at my love languages, my number one love language is the language of gifts. And so people who love to receive gifts in turn generally love to give gifts. And so I love giving gifts to people. So that's number one. But number two is I'm a huge shoe guy. I don't know if you've ever noticed that about me, but I love Jordans. Hey, guilty as charged. Here's why. Because when I was a kid, I didn't get them. And when I was a kid, that was like currency. Jordans where I grew up were like cigarettes in prison. They were like the currency that you went by. And so sometimes I want a pair of shoes, but when I go to buy them, they don't have my size. And so I want them so bad that I'll buy them for Sonny, or I'll buy them for Isaiah or Aubrey. And then I'll wonder why they aren't as excited about those shoes as I am. Are you kidding me? Those are the Jordan 9s in olive and black. Nobody has those shoes. And they're like, huh? My daughter's like, who's Jordan? Is that someone on Broadway? They don't get as excited about it as me because it was the gift that I wanted. But it wasn't the gift that they wanted. It wasn't the gift that they asked for or the gift that they were expecting. One of my favorite Christmas movies, maybe my favorite Christmas movie of all time, is Christmas Vacation. I mean, we got the whole roll in is just because every time I watch that, Sonny makes fun of me, and I get a little emotional, and she's like, why are you crying? I just go, I know, it's so sad. In the middle of this comedy, they put like this terribly sad moment until he falls out of the attic, which is super funny, right? You go, ha, ha, ha. And then every time I go up in the attic, hey, I'm up here. Don't close the thing and don't open it when I'm sitting on it. So Clark Griswold, if anybody's ever seen the movies, he's like the ultimate family guy. And for Christmas that year, Clark was going to buy a swimming pool. He was going to take his Christmas bonus and buy a swimming pool for his family. And he had already put down the deposit. He already had the brochure. He was going to show everybody. And he was so excited about it. He wanted them to know what it was going to look like. He had a little model that, if you've seen the movie, he hits the little diving board. Go home and watch it. There's some cussing in it, but you'll be fine. Pray about it later. you use the language anyway, so don't act shocked when it's on you ever seen people that they're like, oh, he cussed in that movie? Like, he just cussed in the car after he left Starbucks because they gave you the wrong size. There wasn't enough whipped cream. So anyway, when his bonus was delivered, it wasn't what he had anticipated. It wasn't what he had expected. And he has the world's most epic meltdown. And so I thought it'd be fun if we showed you that today. And now listen, there are some splices in this. And the reason there's some splices, don't think our video team is not good at their job. They're really good at their job. There's just some cussing. And we had to cut that part out because we thought, like, this is at Jesus' house. So anyway, watch this little action here. Turn it up.
Hey.
Oh, this is the best.
Clark, what's wrong? Honey? It's bigger than you expected? Smaller? What is it?
It's a 1-year membership in the Jelly of the Month Club.
Clark, that's the gift that keeps on giving the whole year.
That's the best line.
That it is, Edward. That it is indeed.
I'm sorry. Clark.
This isn't the biggest bag over the head punch in the face I ever got.
Son,
Hey! If any of you are looking for any last-minute gift ideas for me, I have one. I like Frank Shirley, my boss, right here tonight. I want him brought from his happy holiday slumber over there on Melody Lane with all the other rich people, and I want him brought right here with a big ribbon on his head. And I want to look him straight in the eye, and I want to tell him what a cheap, lying, no-good, rotten, four-flushing, low-life, snake-licking, dirt-eating, inbred, overstuffed, ignorant, blood-sucking, dog-kissing, brainless, heartless, bug-eyed, stiff-legged, spotty-lipped, worm-headed sack he is.
You ever feel like that? like life is the biggest bag over the head, punch in the face you've ever seen? It wasn't what you anticipated. Life wasn't what you expected. You didn't anticipate that you'd get cancer. You didn't expect that the baby would die. You didn't anticipate that you'd be unemployed this time of year. And you want to say some of that stuff that he said about his boss, but instead you want to say that stuff too and about God. You know what? It's funny on the screen, but it's not funny in life, and you're not alone. And so let me talk to you about a little group of guys who probably felt the same way. I mean, like for hundreds of years, the Jewish people had been asking for one thing. That's it. They'd been waiting for, praying for, preparing for one thing, a Messiah. One guy who would deliver them from their captors, their oppressors, their enemies. For hundreds of years, all they talked about and taught about was a Messiah. Fathers told their sons, who when they were fathers told their sons, who when they were fathers told their sons. Like it was the most anticipated moment of all time up to that moment in time. There had been so many prophecies and predictions about that moment, like predictions and prophecies about this coming person who would finally make things right for them. For these people, many of those predictions and prophecies, actually, they're recorded in what we now call the Old Testament. But for the Jews in that day, it was all about their history lessons becoming their future life. And so, like, these dudes had memorized these predictions. They knew these prophecies backward and forward. And they were looking for anyone who fulfilled any of them. And so like anytime somebody fulfilled like one of the prophecies, these murmurs would begin about the possibility of that person being the Messiah. Fulfill like 2 or 3 of them and the talk would like go into overdrive. Jesus, incidentally, fulfilled 300 of them. In his lifetime, fulfilled 300 messianic prophecies. And so obviously the people were abuzz. Let me just give you some perspective into the improbability of one person fulfilling that many prophecies. This guy is a math guy, Dr. Peter Stoner. He's the former head of mathematics and astronomy at Westmont College. So he did this formula mathematically on what it would look like for one person to fulfill just 48, not 300, because there's no number that could come up with that. But he did the math on what it would take for one person to fulfill 48 messianic prophecies. And the odds that he came up with were 1 in 10 to the 157th power. That is a 1 with 158 zeros behind this. That's some of your credit card bill in January. That's what that looks like. 1 in 10 to the 157th power. Let me give you a little more perspective onto that number. Astronomers have recorded that the number of electrons in our known universe to be 10 to the 52nd power. The world's leading statisticians have determined that once you get odds past 50 zeros, you have literally gone beyond the reality of there being any chance. Yet somehow Jesus did it. And he didn't just do that number. 300 prophecies fulfilled by one guy. So y'all, to the disciples, these guys who know the prophecies, y'all, it's a lock. This is our man. This is our Messiah. And so people began to attach themselves to Jesus. They began to align themselves with his kingdom. After all, they've been waiting 1,500 years for this one guy to arrive. That's a long time to wait for one thing. Besides being a sneakerhead, I'm a watch lover, because to me, this is how I justify it, because men, we've always got a reason why we like something that maybe we shouldn't. So I tell Cynthia, why do you love watches? Because time is precious. So I'm a watch lover. I've had lots of really nice ones over the years. I got a Tag. That was my first really nice watch. Then I got a Breitling, which incidentally, when we moved here, I sold. The church was so small and we had no money, so I sold my watch to make sure. That's the world's smallest violin playing the Godfather song. Anytime you think about violin, for me, I think about the Godfather song. Anyway, I had an Omega. This is the same watch that James Bond had, but for about 10 years, I have wanted a particular watch called a Panerai. And I wanted it initially because my twin brother wore one in the movie The Transporter. Here's a picture of him, incidentally. We look identical. Can you see it? It's literally like the Progressive commercial. If we change name tags, no one would be able to tell. It wasn't me in the movie anyway. But anyway, I haven't gotten one for one obvious reason, and it's the cost. Some things just cost more money than you can just run out to the store and pick up. And so I have an envelope in our budget, and the little envelope just says watch. And periodically I'll put a little money in that envelope, and I'm saving and I'm waiting, because sometimes the price requires some patience, but the payoff, forget about it. So think about these disciples who had waited their whole lives after their fathers had waited their whole lives, whose fathers had waited their whole lives after their fathers had waited their whole lives. Generations had waited their whole lives, and while they were waiting, they were forming in their mind what this Messiah would look like and ultimately what he'd do. And so generations had paid the price with their patience, but in their mind, the payoff, forget about it. He'd be their deliverer. This guy would usher them out of weakness, which they'd been their whole lives. These guys have been in bondage and they've been in weakness, and that he would usher them into dominance. And the price that they'd paid with their patience would pay off by placing them in a position of power and prominence at the top of this new kingdom. And so as far as they were concerned, they knew the return before the investment. In their mind, this was like insider trading. And in the first chapter of the Gospel of John, we read this really cool story about this group of guys who were following the teachings of this great spiritual leader. We now call him John the Baptist, but back in the day, JB had fulfilled a couple of prophecies. And so because he had fulfilled a couple of prophecies, there's this group of dudes who started to wonder, like aloud, if he was the Messiah, which he catches wind of and says, no, hold up. That's not me. Don't put that on me. I'm not the Messiah. You looking for the Messiah? That's my cousin, Jesus. He lives like 2 streets over. You need to go over and kick it with him for a minute because he is the Messiah. And so a couple of his guys take him up on it. And a couple of John's disciples, his followers, they go and they like hang out with Jesus for a day. And after spending like one day with Jesus, they instantly knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that this guy was the guy that they'd been waiting for. And one of them, this dude named Andrew, he wants to obviously get in on the ground floor of the opportunity of a lifetime. And so the first thing, it's the scripture, the first thing that Andrew did was find his brother Simon and tell him, hey bro, we found the Messiah. And he brought him to Jesus. And so before this little couple dudes who were with John knew it, word began to spread, prophecies began to be fulfilled, evidence began to mount. They had found the one that they had been waiting for. And so these disciples, as we call them now, like for 3 years, they're joined by this huge crowd of people who follow Jesus with this anticipation, with these expectations, with these high hopes of what he was going to do. In their mind, Jesus was going to take over. Listen, I know that preachers for hundreds of years have painted a picture of 12 guys who were the most spiritual guys the world had ever known. But can I tell you that the disciples, we're going to discover today, the disciples were no less opportunists than you or I. In their mind, Jesus was going to be king. And when Jesus assumed his place of authority, they would then have been on the ground floor when the whole thing popped off. Like Jesus would look around when he takes his throne and he'd be like, oh yeah, you homeboys have been here the whole time. It's like when somebody runs for president. When somebody runs for president, people start like collecting themselves around the one they think is gonna win. And so people surround those people and like patiently serve that person. You know, they have their own personal aspirations, their own personal agendas, but they're patiently serving that person the whole time that they're running for president. Like Sonny and I have a friend who worked for 2 different presidents, in fact, one of which he worked in the West Wing for them. And a few years ago, he told us something that really, it took me off guard, it surprised me. The minute a president takes office, that person has to fill thousands of jobs. In fact, the website presidentialtransition.org said this: the presidential transition team must fill roughly 4,000 politically appointed positions, including more than 1,000 jobs requiring Senate confirmation. Like, they have to fill so many jobs that like this transition